met each other. We don't need to be involved. Breaking houses, a lot of work. But, you know, 10 acres for 120 grand, I guess, you know. Oh, yeah, I would have started over.
You could build the same thing.
Yeah, use this footprint. Yep.
Okay.
Board foundation in there. Those old stone ones, man, retrofit those here.
That's my parents' house. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it can be done, but it will cost.
And if you go to sell it, what do you have? I know.
That's right over there.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so just so you know, we're recording. We are recording. If you turn your mics on. All right. And if we could, excuse me, audience, excuse me, we're going to start our meeting. Okay, can I have the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If we could stand for a moment of silence for the lives lost in Charlotte, Virginia. Thank you. Okay, I'll call to order the meeting Thursday, August 17th, 2017, regular Board of Selectmen meeting. Any presentations? Arthur's not here. Next, we'll have public comments. Under public comments, it is limited to 3 minutes. I remind the board that we do not respond to public comments, though they can be made. So if there's any public comments, yes, ma'am. If you give your name. Are you on?
Now I am.
There you go.
Good evening. First of all, it's Lorraine Marcantonio, Heritage Village, Southbury, and I'll be very short. What I want to do is express my gratitude to the people of our town and to those of the Board of Selectmen who attended our vigil the other night. It was proof that it is, as they showed up, especially our selectmen, who have very busy personal and professional lives. They took time out of their very busy schedules to demonstrate their true value system and feelings, the same as Southbury did multitude of years ago. I would hope that we continue with that. And again, thank you, Board of Selectmen, those of you who attended.
Thank you. Next, please.
Okay, Barbara Wheeler, Heritage Village. I think the people behind me just sort of want to say the same thing. I want to say thank you. I'm very proud of the town.
Chuck Jones, 150A, Heritage Village. So like many of us, I watched the film footage on TV of the protest march and the violence afterwards. And my first reaction was actually shock and fear, because some of the groups there were targeting me, they were targeting my husband, they were targeting my Black and Latino friends, they were targeting immigrants in my extended family, and I was pretty scared. So, like, where do you look for kind of protection? Well, Department of Justice and Congress and the White House, no. The state, well, kind of yes. I mean, our 2 senators have been very clear about that, and our representatives. But what really gave me hope and a sense of safety was the fact that we had a vigil, that many people came out on that short a notice, and that selectmen came and were willing to stand up and be counted for the values that would protect me. So I want to say to every selectman that was there, thank you very much. You give me a sense of safety in my community.
Next, please.
Hi, my name is Mary Doherty, and I want to talk about what happened in Charlottesville, but I also would like to share that something very disturbing happened to me in Connecticut that morning. I attended Elizabeth Este's town hall up in Torrington, and it was pretty run-of-the-mill, talks about climate change, health care, the economy, you know, very, a good tone, people got along, people were respectful. And then the last 10 minutes, and I'm going to share these with you. Several senior white women stood up and spewed the utmost disturbing anti-Muslim rhetoric. And I wrote down, I was trying to think of what I wanted to say. The way I took their rhetoric was kill or be killed. That was what they were saying. I looked them up online on a media bias website. They are listed as an extreme right hate group here in Connecticut. I know sometimes I get warned this is a blue state and I don't have to worry as a gay person because I'm also gay, but I do. I've become very active in politics, and I have established a relationship with Richard Blumenthal's office due to health care, and what I'd like to do is I reached out to his office, and on very short notice, he showed up to our vigil. So I wrote him and his staff a letter, and I'm just going to read it for the record. We are extremely grateful for Senator Blumenthal's participation in Southbury's vigil yesterday. We were honored that he shared in our endeavor to speak up for the American values of peace, justice, inclusion, and love, and against the anti-American perpetuation of violence, injustice, exclusion, and hate. Senator Blumenthal's opening remarks were excellent and set the tone for our message of solidarity with all people who fight for justice. We felt the vigil was a powerful statement to our community, and Senator Blumenthal played an integral part in our message. Thank you to Senator Blumenthal, Richard Kehoe, his chief of staff, and all their staff for the important work that you do. You are true examples of the power of government officials to act on behalf of the common good. And I'll end with that I hope all elected officials at every level stand against the hate and stand up for people like me that are targets, and all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barbara Adams. I live in the village also, and I just wanted to say thank you to all who participated on Monday evening at the vigil. It was extremely moving, extremely timely, and very healing. It was very important and put together in very rapidly, but extremely well done, and I'm proud of all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Richard Boritz, and I live in the village, and I also want to talk about the vigil and what a comfort it was to us to have people here come and support Charlottesville and oppose hate and bigotry and violence. I think our country is built on unity, inclusion, and compassion. And I hope that, and I do know that the people here support those values, which are American values. And Southbury, I hope, will become a beacon for those kinds of ideals for other people to follow. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Marcoux, and I live in the village. I first learned what was going on in Charlottesville when I got a text Saturday morning from my son, Chris, that said, "Our lovely right to carry in action." And it was accompanied by a photo of guys in camo and carrying assault weapons. It turned out Chris happened to be in Charlottesville that morning. He was visiting a childhood friend. His friend lives about 3 blocks from Emancipation Square, so they walked over to see what was going on. Fortunately, they left before things got really bad, but later they went back after the white supremacist mowed down people with his car. So I got texts and phone calls throughout the day from the battleground. At times like this, it's normal to want to do something, anything. So I was glad when I got the email about the vigil Mike Rosen was organizing on Monday night. It was gratifying that on such short notice, he was able to get so many people there, including Senator Blumenthal, and it was also gratifying that there were young people there. Southbury's been here before. To see Nazis on the march in 2017 is mind-boggling. We seem to be in a Marvel Comics phase of American life. Bombast, saddle-rattling, ugly rhetoric. But as much as we would like, we can't turn our backs. As Arthur Miller said in another context, attention must be paid. And I'm glad Southbury's paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ed Edelson, 609B Heritage Village. Like everyone else before me, I want to thank Mike Rosen for his leadership, and on the record, my thanks to Senator Blumenthal for showing up under short notice. And although everyone has mentioned about the great turnout, there would have been dozens more based on the responses I got of people who said if they had been notified earlier, they would have loved to have been there for the evening. But my real point tonight is, from what I'm reading, this might not be the last time we need to do a vigil. These groups are not been deterred by what's happened either in Charlottesville or the aftermath. And so I think it's important that we understand what the purpose of a vigil is and when we can do it. I think there was some confusion about what and when a vigil can happen. And I just want to point out for the record, and Noreen is here and she can make sure I'm telling the truth, but we did a vigil when Sandy Hook happened. We did a vigil a year afterwards to commemorate a year after the Sandy Hook tragedy. We celebrate veterans. We celebrate Arbor Day. We do this for Flag Day. These are not official holidays per se, but we have people who want to commemorate those events. And we gather, and we do it peacefully, and we do it respectfully. We've had prayer groups come out on the flagpole every year on Prayer Day. And this has always been done without incident or objection. Now, I would expect that we would say that any group that wants to gather peacefully, we would let them do that here in Southbury. Free speech on town property is something that should be encouraged. However, in light of the violence that happened in Charlottesville, I would recommend that the board consider changing or reviewing our ordinances to be clear that people attending any such gathering or parade or event are not allowed to bring weapons. We need to give our police the tools they need to protect public safety, and they should be able to tell anyone with a gun at a public demonstration that this is not safe, and they must either leave or temporarily turn over their weapon to the police. We would love to believe that what happened in Charlottesville could not happen here. Unfortunately, the time for such dreams is long since past. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Arthur, I have you on the agenda. So we didn't see you here. Any other public comments? Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close that portion. If we can move to presentations by Arthur O'Neill, an update on what he has, state issues. Arthur?
Thank you, and I'll join so many others in thanking Jennifer, Justin, Jason, George, as well as Mike Rosen for participating in that vigil that occurred. I think it was a good thing to do, so I congratulate you all on doing that, on having that event. The things going on in Hartford are a little confusing to a lot of people, or maybe a lot confusing to everybody. So let me see. As you know, CBAC agreement was approved, and there were those who thought that this would lead in fairly short order to a budget agreement. CBAC is the concession package in which the state labor unions, employee labor unions made certain concessions to the state employees, rather on behalf of the state employees to the state. The biggest items there were a 2-year wage freeze and a 4-year no layoff clause. There were other changes in contracts, some of which were actually costing the state more money and increasing benefits to various kinds of union members, others of which may provide some sort of long-term savings to the state of Connecticut. The valuation of this was about $1.59 billion over the 2 years of the biennium. The effect of this, unfortunately, is that it then leaves us with a $3.5 billion or thereabouts unresolved financial problem, a deficit for the biennium. The proposal that the governor made, which is the one that he has, the only one he has said he will not veto up until this point in time, calls for massive reductions in state aid to towns like Southbury, and including Southbury, and also sending to Southbury a bill for approximately $1 million a year for the cost of 1/3 of the pension cost for the state of Connecticut for those pensions that teachers whose pensions can be attributable to Southbury, to Region 15. So that you would see a net swing of about a positive $3 million. I'm sort of recapping just so we have we're all on the same page. A positive $3 million roughly, which is what this town gets now from the state, to a negative $1 million, as I understand it, a $4 million swing, the way I've gone through the numbers. I'm pretty sure that's a pretty substantial amount, and not something easily adjusted by simply shutting the lights off a little earlier every day and that sort of thing. Now, ECS money, which is the biggest thing that's being cut here, is normally not distributed. First of all, none of it's distributed for this school year until the end of October. Approximately October 30th is when the checks are supposed to go out. Then there's another check later in the year, I think in December, and a third check in April, 25% in October, 25% December, 50% in April. So most of the ECS money, which is what most of this hit amounts to, won't really show up, as it were, or its absence won't be noticed until around the 30th of October, when the checks don't come in. Because that's the governor's plan, basically, is not to send money to towns like Southbury. And whether it's under the terms of his executive order, which is the way the state is operating right now, the governor issued a roughly 119-page executive order in which he specified how he was reallocating money in order to try to control the deficit and deal with the absence of a budget, or under the governor's budget proposal, if it were to become adopted. Either way, Southbury stands to lose all of this money that we're talking about, millions of dollars over the next couple of years. Did you have a question, or was I just,
No.
Okay, scribbling.
Clarifying something you just said.
Okay. Now, there are other cuts, other sources of funds to the town besides ECS, and most of them don't really start to kick in until the end of September. So in other words, if there's a check you were expecting to get, there are hardly any checks in August or even September, up until about September 15th. And these are relatively small amounts of money that that the town might be looking to get. And I'm trying to, I have a list here, and so the way the monies are distributed, for example, grants for pilot state property, which is a big number for Southbury, it would be about 300,000. State pilot checks go out on September 30th. So if no state pilot checks go out, around October 1st is when you'll notice, gee, we didn't get our state pilot check, and therefore we're short $300,000. Reimbursement for elderly circuit breakers, December 30th. So it's not like something's going to happen on that one and you're going to suddenly be short of money in a week or two. Again, it's going to take a long time for that money to come through. Tax relief for veterans is another thing. A town gets a fair amount of cash for that. December 30th is when you would normally get that check. So in effect, for many of the things that the town would get a check, and I'll give you a copy of this list if you don't have it, so you understand when the cash flow issues might start to crop up. Because I got an email, and I'm assuming that part of what we're talking about here is how does this impact the town's cash flow from the state of Connecticut. And there won't be much of an impact until the end of October. And in that case, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the real impact won't occur until December and then finally April, when the ECS money doesn't come in. That's the biggest ticket item. These other items are not insignificant, but again, they're staggered throughout the fall and into even January of next year before you'll be seeing these checks that in effect, won't be coming because the state either doesn't have a budget and the governor's operating under his executive order, or a budget very close to the governor's ends up being adopted, and the town is basically told you're not going to get very much, if any, money from the state of Connecticut in the coming year.
But has the new ECS formula been established?
No, there is no new ECS formula. What the governor is doing, and I'm not totally clear on whether he really has the legal authority to do this, because we're in sort of new territory as far as legal operations are concerned. What the governor is doing is working on the belief or the assumption that he can just reallocate money and redistribute money that's meant to be given to municipalities, that he has exclusive authority to do that. I'm not sure that he does. I'm not prepared to say that he doesn't. But this is something we've never gone through before because we've always had a budget that was adopted before that moment arrived, where those decisions had to be made. The Attorney General has issued opinions over the last few years in which it's basically said the governor has the obligation to keep operating the state government to maintain health, safety, and welfare of the people of the state of Connecticut. Those, and I see Jason smiling, are kind of flexible terms as to exactly what constitutes one person's vision of safety is another person's vision of unnecessary, and somebody else might think something is critical for welfare of the people of the state, and somebody else might say, well, no, it's not really. So we don't really know for sure how that language would be addressed by a court, which is where, as we keep going, I think more and more likely we're going to see someone take some of this to court, because whereas Southbury could open up, and Region 15 could open up the school system and keep on going for months and months, maybe most of the year, before they'd really notice the absence of the money from Hartford, the city of Hartford, gets 60% of its total budget, not just education, from the state government. So if they don't get their checks, they have very little operating room. I mean, opening up schools and that sort of thing is going to be very difficult for Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, and any of those towns that get a substantial amount of their money. So even if small towns like Southbury that are getting cut the most don't go and do something in terms of litigation, I'm beginning to think that someone is going to if this keeps on going. So I think that the future here is still very unclear as to what's going to happen. I am not getting the impression that there is a growing sense of crisis that people will suddenly say, okay, we're going to vote for something, we don't care what, we're going to get a budget, even if it's the worst budget ever written in the history of writing budgets in the state of Connecticut, but we're going to vote for something because we're desperate to do something. I think there may be more pressure like that starts to build up as schools don't open up in various parts of the state, or they open for 2 weeks and then shut. And we may start to see some pressure building up in that regard. I have been told that the leadership of the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House, Mr. Arasimowicz, and the Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Ritter, have said that they plan to get back in on the week of September 11th and vote on a budget, apparently, at that time. I have not seen a document. So far as I know, no one has seen a document that would be the basis of doing that voting. The Senate leadership, which includes Senator Looney, who's the president pro tem, Senator Fasano, who shares that kind of position with Senator Looney. He's the Republican because the Senate is equally divided. As far as I know, they have not called for a meeting in September 11th or 12th or 13th. I mean, anything. They're not apparently coordinated with the House of Representatives, the Democratic leadership, which is are the people who make the decision about calling us in. And so we don't know, I don't know for sure whether we're really going to go in, because there have been calls to come in and statements about we're going to get something done by a certain date, and then things didn't happen. On the other hand, CBAC was called for a vote, and it was voted on the day that the leadership in the House said that they were going to vote on it, and it passed. So it's It's possible we might go in on September 12th or 13th and vote on a budget or not. And I really don't know with any great certainty. I know that there is no document that has been agreed to that represents a consensus with a large number of people prepared to vote for that budget document. And I know the governor has been saying, and has not changed his position so far as I know, that he would veto the proposals coming out of the House of Representatives, which were that there be about a $500 to $600 million increase in the sales tax, going from 6.35 to 6.99, and then additional taxes on restaurants and hotels to plug the gap, and therefore avoid making towns absorb the cost of pensions. And the governor said that that tax increase is a no-go for him. He's been saying this for weeks. And so if that's the budget that's being proposed, that's going to be voted on by the House leadership, that they're planning to bring forward, I don't know where it goes, because the governor says he's going to veto it. And the Senate has never signed on to that document either. So if you would like me to try to answer questions, this, as I said, is sort of new territory. When we had the income tax and we were without a budget for months, and that was really the first time in modern times Connecticut did not adopt a budget, and the governor Weicker had to try to run the state without a budget. The budget was finally agreed to on August 22nd, August 21st, 22nd. It's a little blurry because we went in at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 21st, and we ended up voting at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the 22nd, and I never got any sleep. So, but I know it was somewhere in there that the thing was voted on. So we've never really gone this much further than right now without a budget in the middle to the end of August. So where we're going to go at this point, I'm not entirely sure. And certainly don't know for sure whether there's going to be relief. I helped co-author a budget, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because the events have moved on, but I did co-author a budget with my Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives. It would have balanced, but it called for about $400 million of additional concessions from the state employees. That option is now off the table because the CBAC agreement that was ratified by the employees and which was voted favorably by both the Senate and the House doesn't have those $400 million in concessions. We're trying to figure out how to balance a budget without that, but that's very difficult. That kind of, as I said, that sort of locked us in, and that was the first of a string of potential dominoes to fall that were going to go in a particular direction. It was going to be very difficult to balance a budget without those concessions that would provide the money that Southbury was accustomed to getting and not require Southbury or any other town to pick up 1/3 of the cost of the teachers' pensions. So, questions?
Let me first say that I go to the Connecticut Council of Municipalities and CCM. There was a statement made by the governor that indicated that CCM and Cost were on board with his budget and the way it was. And there is one statement by CCM which listed three: the governor's budget, the Democratic budget, and CCM agreed that the Republican budget was balanced if they could get the concessions.
Mm-hmm.
That has taken that budget out of whack because now we don't have the concessions. And I would just explain is that CCM represents 169 towns in the state of Connecticut. And I've sat with Mayor O'Leary and with the governor of Hartford and others, and they were not particularly happy with the governor or the Democratic budget. And it's frustrating for everybody in CCM, and that includes the cities and the towns in the state. And Cost came out, Council of the Small Towns, which we're part of also, that what was stated by the governor wasn't exactly what they, they did it very nicely, but they didn't agree with that statement. And I also wanted to say that my office has been starting to look into, with Bill Sorosky, the cash flow of the town to see where, and the impact and when, and how we can handle it. So we're working on those figures, just so that you know that. Because this is going to come, and again, I think the indications I'm getting, we'd be lucky. My indication is September, we'd be lucky. Some people are talking October, and that's pretty serious. You're right, Arthur. It's a pretty, at that point, it'd be a pretty serious cash flow problem for a lot of the municipalities. So we are looking at the cash flow to start with. So if anybody else has any questions.
I have a general question. I mean, there have been states in the country that have not had budgets for years.
Yeah.
I mean, could that happen here? And if so, does that just give Malloy carte blanche to just do whatever he wants to do? Is that what's gonna happen?
I think that is possible, that Illinois went for 3 years without a budget. They just adopted one a few weeks ago. The pressure, in effect, the external force that's going to act upon, this is like physics, you know, an unbalanced external force is what moves something, right? So it's going to take something coming into Hartford saying, you know, we've got to do something to deal with some part of this problem differently from what everybody else has been talking about up till now. I mean, it is possible. I mean, there are people who do not want to vote for a $500 million tax increase, $600 million tax increase in the House, among the House Democrats, who are probably going to have a very hard time voting for that. They don't want to do that. There are no votes, certainly not mine, for a $600 million sales tax increase. So I'm not quite sure how you do it, since the Democrats have a 78, or 79, rather, 72 majority. They need almost every single one of their members to vote for something. If 5 of them don't, if they defect and vote no, then the proposal dies. This is the closest we've ever had the balance of power between the two parties in the House of Representatives, and of course in the Senate it's perfectly evenly balanced. And again, you might be able to get something, if you could get something 18 people could vote for in the Senate, but that's not going to happen, it seems like, up until now. There are a couple of members, 3 particular Democratic senators, who have said repeatedly that they don't want to vote for tax increases. They seem to soften quite a bit during the CBAC discussion, where they seem to be saying that they would be willing to, based on promises of future changes in the way the state does business, to try to avoid recurring deficits and to deal with the $60+ billion of unfunded liabilities for health care, pensions for state employees, as well as teachers' pensions. So, you know, there is that possibility. So, I mean, you've got the political ingredients for the, you know, for a long period of time where people won't vote for, you can't get a majority to vote for anything, for a kind of hung legislature.
Like, yeah. And then that Governor Malloy has said that he'd veto anything except for
Right.
the budget. Anyway, so it looks to me like we're just not going to have a budget. And I'm just wondering, if we don't have a budget, who calls the shots?
Well, the governor does. I mean,
Yeah, well,
as a
what-
practical matter,
that's
until the
what I'm
court
hearing.
steps in.
Is he limited at all, like by last year's budget? Is he limited at all by like last year's budget or by line items, or like he can't raise taxes? So
Right.
what? He's got a
Yeah, what can
limit
he do?
somewhere, but is it just sort of we don't
Well,
know what it is?
his problem is that at some point, the state will run out of money. We kind of had this situation develop in 1991, and what Governor Weicker did was he borrowed, and this is going to seem all kind of antiquated, he borrowed from the then loaded with money Japanese banking system, because they had all this money to loan, and so they went to Japan and borrowed hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to keep the state going, to keep being able to write checks, against the expectation that we were eventually going to adopt a budget. Obviously, the world has changed a lot, and Japan is no longer in the position to lend us all that money. At least I don't think so. Maybe China. But
Maybe
that's the status that we ended up basically having to borrow money to keep up with payroll. Now, the governor has also said that he will not worsen the deficit. And if you go out and borrow $1 billion to make payroll for November or December, or whatever point in time we run out of cash, then obviously that would be worsening the deficit. And so there are some pressures that could be brought to bear. The city of Hartford is, I'm sure you've read, looking for about $40 million to balance their budget, which is unbalanced. They don't know where they're going to get the money to balance their budget. That's in addition to everything else they get. They need an extra $40 million, maybe $50 million to keep the city's lights on. They could conceivably go file for bankruptcy. They can't do that in Connecticut without the permission of the governor. He has to sign an authorization for a municipality to file bankruptcy. So that applies to you as well. So if you're thinking about that, don't, unless you think you're going to get the governor to sign off on it. He has been somewhat ambivalent about whether or not he would agree to allow Hartford to file for bankruptcy, which would then allow them to perhaps get out from under pension obligations and or give all of their bondholders a renegotiated bond package that they have to deal with, a haircut, as Mayor Bronin said. So that might be the kind of an event that if, and Hartford has some bonds coming due in the very near future, in the next few weeks, and then a couple months from now, they've got a lot more coming due. They probably won't be able to make their bond payment. There's a good chance. So if they default on their bonds, that's something that they, is an external event that will suddenly say, okay, something really does have to be done. Either allow them to go into bankruptcy and renegotiate with everybody, or come up with $40 million. Now, the governor can keep doing this, rob Peter to pay Paul operation, where he takes money from South Korea and gives it to Hartford, but eventually, because we're still $3.5 billion short for the biennium, he's going to run out of money. I mean, to give you an idea, for this year, we're about 9% short. So you could probably get through about 90% of the fiscal year before you absolutely run out of money. The problem is that our money doesn't come in a nice, steady flow. We get a lot of money in January, and we get a lot of money in April when people do their final estimated quarterlies, and they get they're filing their tax returns, or they're filing for extensions, and we get a lot of checks. Hundreds of millions, billions of dollars flow into the state right around April 15th. So there's nothing happening that's going to trigger people to spend or send a lot of checks to Hartford in terms of tax payments in October and November. So so this may, depending on, it's hard to predict these kind of cash flow oscillations, but there's a good chance that we might run into a point where there's no money in the checking account to pay bills.
That's another question. On the proposal you mentioned with the increase of the sales tax, that you indicated that if they did that, that would probably take care of the pension contribution. But even with that, don't we still have the ECS problem?
Yeah.
So you take care of the third of the pension, but you still have the ECS hole. So instead of $4 billion hit to the town of Southbury, it's a $2.5 million hit, or something like that. So even that budget doesn't sound like.
See, one of the problems I have in answering that question is that there actually is no budget. The Democratic caucus has never produced a document that they could share with us and say, okay, these are our ideas about what we should do with ECS. These are our ideas about what we should do with Town Aid Road and so forth and so on. So we don't really know what the rest, other than the $600 million tax increase, and we'll take back the pension obligation. We won't force the pension obligation down the throats of the towns. Other than those two big points, we don't know what's in the rest of the budget that they might be working on. And unfortunately, I've been through this often enough. When that document gets written, it will be written by 2 or 3 people in a back room someplace, and no one will really know what's in it, if in fact the document is created, and it will be whipped out for a vote on the floor of the House, and it will be voted on with a lot of people having no real understanding of what the contents of that document are. That's what we've been through, I've been through on too many occasions where, you know, the people in control, the majority party, decides, okay, this is what we want to do, and even their own members don't know. The speaker knows, the majority leader knows, maybe one or two other people, a lawyer who's actually drafting the language, who has to know what he's being told to put in the, but the rest of the members of the legislature won't really know. It'll be one of those, you'll read it after you vote for it kind of deals that we've heard about in Washington.
Probably no time for an actuarial to actually
Look
at the numbers and determine that it's correct. They just put it out there. Jennifer, you have a question?
Yeah, about the reserves. How are a town's reserves affecting the way the towns are getting hit? Are they yet, or is that the next step?
I think that's the next step. You got the letter from Ben Barnes, I assume, that all the towns got, and some towns came up with colorful responses in terms of, you know, telling Mr. Barnes that they weren't going to give him the information or he could get it someplace else. I think what it is, and the governor has said this, I was at a cost meeting a couple of years ago where the governor was talking about, hey, you know, you towns are loaded with money, you don't really, you know, you don't need all this money from the state. You've got plenty more reserves than we do, and it may well be because the rainy day fund is pretty well depleted. That when you add up all the reserve funds across the state of Connecticut, the municipalities have a lot more money in reserve than the state of Connecticut does. So I think what's going to happen is when the governor is making decisions, he hasn't said this, but I don't know why else you would want to know that Southbury has $1 million in reserve, and let's say Greenwich has $10 million, so, you know, Greenwich is in a better position to absorb a $9 million hit than Southbury is, and so you send Southbury a $900,000 hit instead of a $9 million hit. I mean, I don't know why else what else would you use that information for?
Part of the, we've been sent that letter, which the disturbing part was that it came very soon after the CBAC vote. And they were looking for information on our surplus, and as you know, we do zero-based budgeting, and you know, the money is budgeted for certain places within the budget, and if everything goes the way it's supposed to, the money should be spent. The disturbing part is that that's, in my opinion, exactly what they're doing. They're looking to see, quite frankly, what the municipalities can absorb. On the other side, there is a recommendation, I believe, by the state that we have a certain amount of money buffer, if you will, and that has to do with our, if we needed bond or bond ratings and things of this nature. So on one hand, what's happening, what I'm seeing coming from Hartford is how much can we take from the municipalities, the towns, the well-organized, well-run towns. And let me explain something. In talking with the Council of Small Towns and talking with CCM, it's really boiling down. It doesn't matter if it's a Democratic mayor or a Republican mayor. We're all frustrated because they're looking to see what we can absorb. And by responding to that money, they're trying to, you know, and quite frankly, I don't even know if the flowery explanations about, it's kind of like, I don't think they already have their mind, they already have a plan in place. Mm-hmm. And you're going to send this back and they're going to say, okay, execute the plan. Because I don't think they have a choice. I don't think they have, there's no more money.
Yeah, I mean, the governor's budget was predicated, I mean, it was never outlined, perhaps quite like this or bottom lined it, but it goes like this. By shifting the teacher pension fund obligation and cutting state aid to municipalities, most especially ECS, it's essentially shifting the state budget to the municipalities. And then some towns may be able to survive and not have to do a tax increase, but I'm guessing that many towns are going to have to do some kind of a tax increase. And so what you're really doing is shifting the tax increase from the state level to the local level, and it's going to be kind of erratic in the way that it's going to be handled, depending on, you know, two different towns that in many other ways are identical to each other, and the taxpayers have the same incomes, but because, you know, Southbury was very prudent and saved a lot of money and has money so it can absorb it. Maybe the tax increase in Southbury will be $50 per person or $100 per person, and in some other town where they never set that kind of money aside over the years, they might be facing a tax increase of $500 per person. And the two people, persons getting hit have identical incomes, but it's just a function of the nature of the community and the prudence of the political decision makers at the local level that are going to create this up and down impact that towns are going to be facing. And of course, the political consequence is that someone is going to be able to say, well, I didn't raise taxes. I didn't vote to raise taxes. Well, no, not state taxes, but you voted to raise, and maybe even I didn't vote to raise taxes in my hometown because that particular town may be getting all the money that they need. But Southbury's taxes or Middlebury's taxes or Woodbury or Roxbury or Washington's taxes may all go up as a result of having all the monies being taken away from them that they've been getting from the state of Connecticut for the last many years, which in many cases is far less than what we were supposed to be getting under the ECS formula. So it's not like we were getting tons of extra money.
Any other questions?
Any good news anywhere?
It's hard to.
Stop them.
I mean, you look for a silver lining. My hope is that this is going to be the kind of cathartic experience that we're going to go through this, and that there will be fundamental change and structural change in the way the state does business, that this financial crisis will force people to really take a long, hard look at the patterns and practices. Unfortunately, the CBAC agreement is kind of like just a continuation, a tweak here, a nip and a tuck there, but it really is kind of a continuation of the basic pattern, and we are still stuck with a set of obligations going forward that the state cannot afford. And we are still in a position where the business community has been saying, you've got to start addressing your fundamental structural problems in a major way, because we can see that this deficit is nothing compared to the one you're going to have 5 or 8 years from now. We can do the math. They have actuaries who can do the math. And their actuaries are telling them Connecticut is going to be looking for billions and billions of dollars of tax increases unless we change the way we do business. And we can't keep all the promises that people say that we made. And we certainly can't keep adding to that list of promises. But that is my hope. So far, that's all it is a hope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Okay, reports. Any questions on reports? Announcements and correspondence. Any questions or anything on announcement? Okay. Next is the consent agenda. Is there any questions on the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve as written.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and it carries. Okay, minutes of August 3rd, 2017, regular meeting.
Move they be approved?
I have a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion?
I'll abstain.
You'll abstain. Do we have a quorum?
I'll abstain.
Because you weren't here?
You could still.
We have a quorum.
You could still vote.
Okay. Entertain a motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, and it carries. Okay. Bids and procurements under personal property audit. This is someone who has been doing the audit for us for a number of years. It's quite frankly, it was put out, and that's who bid.
Only 2 came in?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll entertain a motion to approval, resolve that the Southbury Board of Selectmen, upon the recommendation of the assessor, hereby awards the bid for up to 30 personal property audits for Charles Feldman and Associates of Madison, Connecticut, in the amount of $15,000.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion?
This
Is
is
it
for the,
I'm sorry. I'm just confused by the wording. Is it $15,000 for up to 30, or is it $15,000 per?
No,
audit?
15,000.
Total, the
for
total
up to
price
30.
is $15,000.
Right,
Okay.
correct,
and this is typically the 30 largest payers.
correct. Okay, any other discussion? Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And it carries. Under unfinished business, I would like to table Pierce Hollow, pending our executive session.
Motion to table.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, and it carries. Any questions on the referral from land use for the purchase of town-owned property?
Make a motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Made and second. Any discussion on this? Any questions? No, it's just a little piece of property and has all the caveats on there, can't be blah, blah, blah. Okay, all,
I
yes,
have to recuse myself
and of course.
for material reasons. I always have to do this also.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And it carries, with Jennifer abstaining from it. Any new business? I don't have any new business tonight. First, Selectmen's report. I just want to report, and maybe some know, maybe some don't. Graffiti was reported to be on a bench in one of our town parks. I called the town police to investigate. It was graffiti, it was vandalism, and instructed the Department of Public Works to have the graffiti moved as soon as the police were done with what they had to do for their investigation, and the Department of Public Works removed the graffiti that day and repainted the bench. The graffiti, quite frankly, I prefer not to get into details, but it was racist, anti-Semitic, and vulgar in nature. If anybody cares to meet me privately, I don't know why, but the police believe it was probably done over a year ago, but certainly not recently. It was also conveyed to me that they feel it was probably an act perpetrated by an adolescent teenager. I would ask that if the public sees graffiti of any nature, that they call the town and report it immediately. Our citizens are the best line of defense against this type of crime. Our citizens care about each other and the quality of our parks and town properties. You know the saying, if you see something, say something, and we'll get out there. Secondly, Lori Sorlin works in the tax collector's office. I am appointing her interim tax collector given the current absence of our tax collector. So if people call and say, who's acting as the tax collector, we have an official act, so you know that. Also, I don't know if people remember, I was to give the Board of Selectmen a report on EMS. The Board of Selectmen asked for a report on our EMS for August. I just want to let you know I have asked our town attorney to engage a consultant with the expertise needed in this field. My assistant Cindy Harrison and I started to look into this and determined that the complexities of the ambulance service requires this resource. I will engage this consultant through our attorney, and at the recommendation of our attorney. I feel this is a better way to engage the consultant so that there's no outside influence. I think everybody remembers the Connecticut Water announcement of the consultant, and then was within a little while, it was like, it can't be done. So I want you to know that that's the approach we're going to take. EMS, ambulance, everything is very complicated. I'm not even sure the experts know what they're doing. It's quite something. So we felt that that would be the best way to.
Based on your discussions with Jeff Tinley in that regard, do you have a timeline in mind as to when the consultant would be engaged and how long it would take that individual to conduct the analysis?
I don't know how long yet, but I do expect to engage, if not by the end of this month, beginning of September, we'll have some.
And then I understand you have some concerns about doing it that way so, you know, certain information isn't out there, whatever. It would be helpful if the board, though, could be kept in the loop about who's being engaged and the scope of engagement.
Yes.
So once that happens, perhaps if we could have Jeff Tinley come to an executive session and, you know, determine what the appropriate scope of that session would be so that we could have input into that process.
We can. What started out, we're looking at different consultants. There's many different consultants around, and we unearthed some other companies across the country that have done work like this. So it's not as simple as, okay, let's grab that consultant and let's get the right one. It's important that we get the right information. So it's not a rush. We need to do the right thing. But I didn't want you to think I forgot about that report. Certainly there's others who have not. Just so you know. Any questions on the Selectmen's report?
I just had a question about the graffiti you were talking about.
Yes, sir.
It's obviously concerning with that type of graffiti at any time. This week is even more so. You said that the police determined that it was over at least a year old. Do they give any indication of like how old or?
No, I mean without doing forensic expensive. They you know, the graffiti has been, you know, in their profession they've been around other, and they went by the discoloration of the wood compared to what the other wood was, and that was their opinion. As far as finding someone, you know, the length of time, you know, the time span that had to be there, you know,
Which park was it?
Janie Pierce. So I think our best, like I said, I think our best defense is our citizens who use our park. We also had graffiti at Cedarland just before we were going to have a opening or whatever, and the Public Works went right down and took care of it. Someone had spray painted, and they cleaned it right up. And
was it in a publicly accessible place that a lot
yes,
of people
it was in the
went
park.
to, and nobody reported it for a year? That's kind of surprising, I would think.
Well, that was their opinion. It could be a year, but you know they
You
can't
don't know, yeah, maybe it
determine.
was
They
6
said it
months.
certainly wasn't new. It was offensive. If you'd like to see pictures, that's fine.
No, not really.
But I don't need to see them. I've seen enough. But we will guard against that.
I know because it may be an adolescent that we can't reveal their name, but there should be a shame factor to somebody who would do something like that.
Well, I mean, they can't. They believe it probably was, and that's what they expressed to me. And it's a shame. Quite frankly, yes, it's a shame that that this would happen in general or by young people, and sometimes the frontal lobe doesn't develop. But anyway, and our parks are well attended, and we care a great deal about our parks, and there's no room for this in here. But please, if everybody else, if you're in the parks, you see, no, I can't. Sorry. But if you're in the parks and you see something, our citizens, let's just say something and we'll get it. We can investigate it sooner, but secondly, we can, nobody should have to see that. Okay, reports from liaisons.
I actually have a report.
Very good.
And I handed it out. You have all this stuff from the IT steering committee, which is very good at writing its own reports, so they don't necessarily need me to add to them, but I'll try to summarize quickly what they were talking about. There is an alternate member opening on the committee, and it's posted on the town website. So if anybody out there knows anybody that wants to be involved with steering IT, there is an opening. The police surveillance camera project is going quite well. I saw a demo of what the cameras can do. One of the cameras actually has like a 360 view, so it sees everything all around. It's pretty amazing. The resolution is very good, and the zoom capabilities are pretty amazing. I mean, this is unlike anything we've ever had for surveillance at the police department. Most of the cameras had been installed, about 3/4 as of the meeting on August 9th. I don't know, maybe by now they're all installed. There's going to be about 20 cameras in total. Ray is going to add a couple more cameras to the original plan. Not sure why exactly. I guess when they started putting them up, they realized that they needed a little more coverage, but despite the extra cameras, he thinks that'll still come in under budget. You probably know all this, Jeff.
There was actually one camera that, I mean, you know, they installed everything. There was one camera that wasn't working too well, or there was a problem, so I mean, hard to believe that a new thing could be, but they're replacing that.
Ah, okay, so one of them did. But I'm sure you've seen the demos, and they're pretty impressive what these cameras can do. According to Ray, the network license that we've purchased will support 50 cameras, and they could be located at other buildings, other facilities, public works, town hall, wherever you want to put them. So if we want to expand, we have that capability. Camera policy, I was going to do some work on that, and I didn't realize the meeting was coming up so soon, so I hadn't done anything. So I'll try to do it before the next meeting. The upgrade of the town hall Wi-Fi, there's really a serious need. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but when a lot of people are trying to use it, it does get pretty slow. So that should be done this year. Ray thinks the new switch upgrade will help a lot. Streaming video is going to YouTube, which costs us nothing, amazingly enough. They can store many terabytes of data and they don't charge you anything. We did have to buy a new encoder for about $1,200, but after that, we don't have to pay the $3,500 a year that we were paying to Devos, that part of the Capital Region COG group that hasn't worked very well. A lot of people have had problems with that, and they're dropping out of it. So this is a very good thing for us. I think we can continue basically at no cost to do
We invested in the $3,500, we invested in some hardware for that? Can we do anything with that now that we're not using it? If we're just
No, that was
just
just
the
the fee you had to pay Devos to do it every year. So now we don't have to pay the $3,500, so.
We can still use the camera.
Oh, yeah, that's, when you were doing the strategic plan here, I had to leave, I could watch it from home on YouTube. It was working. I mean, I've seen other people try to do it, but it worked really well. I mean, my opinion, but.
Supposedly, the YouTube connection will not change the way the videos are viewed. You still have to go to the town website. According to Ray, you can't see the videos on YouTube directly. You can only see them through the town website. So even though YouTube is hosting them, you can't go to YouTube and actually watch the town videos. Supposedly, we can delete videos from the YouTube storage if we see fit. I don't know why we'd want to do that, but that capability exists. One of the advantages of the YouTube system is that they give you a very accurate count of users. The Devos system did not. It basically didn't count hardly anybody. So if you looked at the user count on the videos that were up there, you'd get a very low number. And we don't think that was accurate. But the YouTube counting system is precise, so we'll know exactly how many people are watching. The Town Hall PC replacement program is underway. 43 new desktop PCs will be Dells. Kind of mid-range processors, nothing special, but that's probably good enough for what we need here. A couple interns are starting soon. One is going to work on the process mapping project. That's been one of the things we've talked about for a while. And the other is going to take a look at a list of tax exemptions and breaks to see who's getting breaks for what. And I guess this is under Jeff's, you could probably talk way more about that than I can.
That was a project that was originally, we tried to get it started in the beginning, wasn't working well, and it's been asked by the Board of Finance from when we were, if you remember, doing budgeting. They're looking for an idea of the equity of these tax abatements that were given. So we're going to get the equity number, yeah, and it's going to require some math and some expertise in that field. So I think they can take care of it. And before you go on, George, I just want to say on the police video, I mean, we all think, okay, we got security for our police, which is true. We want to monitor that. But another thing, understand that many times if there's a contentious divorce where there's a common meeting place to exchange the children or meet. A lot of times they meet at the police department parking lot, so you have to behave yourself. And by monitoring it and have it videoed, it secures people, and I think people know they're being videotaped. So there's more to it than just the police department. Also, you know, not that we're doing it now, but if you are having someone come in, what happened when the police were bringing them in, and, you know, so that it's not, protect our police, but it's also the citizens. So that was part of it. So go ahead.
The last thing I'd mention is that in this package, there's a very nice report from GOSHA on the increase in website viewership. It's pretty significant since we went online with the new website, and it's documented in here. A lot of positive comments on the website, so thanks to GOSHA.
Great job by GOSHA, and I will say that Ed started that then, and it's turned out, GOSHA did a fantastic job, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah, it took longer than we thought, but the amount of work required was just staggering.
Nobody knew we had so many
dead pages.
What to believe in government.
Are you going to use CCM for that camera policy you're trying to work on? That'd be a good resource. We can't be the only town to have cameras.
No, we certainly are not. You can do a Google search and you can find any number of surveillance camera policies. They're not all the same. I mean, they're quite different when you read them. But yes, CCM would be a good resource for sure.
An municipal connection.
Yeah, they might have someone there, who knows.
Anything else, George?
That's it.
Okay. Mr. Betty?
Economic Development had a rather quick meeting last night. It was moved up an hour so the Strategic Task Force could meet at 7:30 and Economic Development could join them. Perhaps the most important thing that came out of the meeting is that the new EDC Facebook page has been up for a few weeks now. They're very encouraged by the reaction to it so far, interaction with it so far. Other things that are ongoing are the Welcome to Southbury signs for the different entry points. The shopper bags are coming soon. And that's about it at the moment. Investment portfolio oversight has not met since our last meeting. They do meet in September, I believe. And Energy Task Force has not met this year yet. Oh, really? Good. I'll be there.
Okay. Jason?
LEPC was canceled yesterday, and library doesn't meet over the summer, so no meetings.
Good. Ms. Naylor?
Senior Commission met yesterday, but unfortunately I didn't get to that very brief meeting. Planning Commission met, and they approved modifications for the revitalization of the Kmart Plaza. So that building is confirmed to be Kmart's no longer. It's going to be 3 retail businesses. They're going to be amending the ingress into the lot to include a designated third left-hand turn lane. They're going to be opening up the area by Talbot's, the parking lot by Talbot's, to incorporate another 38 parking spots over there to allow for the 2 lower-level retail businesses that will be, you'll be able to entrance that way. The main entrance through Kmart will still remain. So that was some of their major changes. They approved 3 lots on 50 acres on Burr Road, which has been an ongoing, this is the next phase of it. They also were going to talk about the STS study that was done by Malone and Broom, but they've now dedicated a special planning meeting to discuss that, I believe, on September 12th at 7 o'clock. So that was that. Strategic Planning Task Force, we had our presentation workshop last week. We had 25 people attend. We got some very good comments and feedback. We are forging along, meeting with council government, meeting with Planometrics, and getting a lot of input to prepare a community survey, which we hope to do in the next 6 weeks or so. The department heads are being surveyed currently about the role and vision of their departments and any restrictions and things. And we've asked for some real candid responses, and we've given them through to September 9th or 10th to respond, and we've gotten some very good, thoughtful responses so far. Work groups are formed, and we're going to be meeting kind of regularly.
God bless you.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
God bless Justin, too. He's doing a lot, too.
Um,
John.
And he's got 2 hips.
I will say, I was at that meeting. It was my birthday. I did have,
You had a slide.
but what I was actually quite pleased to hear. I mean, we are always concerned about our grand list, but the ratio of the grand list, surprisingly,
Isn't so bad compared
we
to
were
other
better
towns.
than all the other towns.
All 5 others.
That doesn't mean we can't try to keep that number up or keep it better, but it was quite surprising how we compared. So that work you're doing that's a positive side. I mean, I just want to say that what I also heard during a lot of this strategic planning as people came up, and we'll get more information. But one thing that was very important to the people that I heard from, I think, was the quality of life we have in Southbury and why they came here. And I think that's important to remember because in the type of town we are and the quality of life, which was nice to hear that that's why they came here. And I've said this from the beginning with all this difficulty in the state and the budget, that one thing I need to remember, and I hope the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, hard decisions are going to have to be made. But without a quality of life in our town, what are we here for? So I really want to try and maintain that type of quality for our citizens as best we can as we go through this. So
One very, very important point to point out is that all of our commissioners love this town. We don't think it's broken. We think that it needs to be improved, because it's not sustainable the way it is. We have to look to the future, and so that's the goal of the process.
And I think with what you're doing, and I think with some of these consultants, and we get this going where we have process and procedures, we can narrow some of the, I mean, we talk about efficiencies of government. That doesn't mean no longer having a quality of life.
Right.
So I think we'll do well with that. Mike Rosen is not able to be with us tonight, so we'll move on. Is there any other business? Did I hear any other business? We'll close that. None. I will close that. I'll entertain a motion to move into executive session regarding a memo from our town attorney in regards to Pierce Hollow Village. Okay, have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, the second, all in favor? And we'll enter into executive session at 8:12. Inviting Cindy Harrison in with us. Oh, you were giving them to us.
Well, they just kind of, can't go, it's,
Okay.